So I want to go ahead and get going to make sure that we have got the maximum amount of time for our discussions today. You have landed in bringing computational thinking to your classroom. My name is Vance Kite, and I'm going to give you my agenda, tell you about myself, and then we're going to go ahead and jump on in. So here's what we're going to do for today. We're going to start out with, who am I? So you know who's talking to you. We're going to talk about what is CT. You're going to keep seeing that abbreviation CT stands for computational thinking. I don't want to say computational thinking 1,000 times, so when you see CT, that's what it means. We're going to talk about why it's important, and then the bulk of our time is going to be working on how can I build CT into my instruction, math, science, or otherwise. So let's talk about me first. My name is Vance Kite, and I am an escaped or recovering science teacher, however you want to look at it. I was a high school science teacher for 8 years, first in Florida, and then the last 5 I taught in Durham Public Schools. Taught all of the high school sciences except for the hard ones, no chemistry, no physics. Did all the rest of them. But 2 years ago, I got the opportunity to come back to state full-time, working on a PhD in science education. They said, hey, we'll pay your tuition, we'll also pay you on top of that. Look, you can pay your bills and go to school for free. And I said, great, let's do that. If you need to get a hold of me afterwards, email address, vkite@ncsc.edu. I will be putting this presentation up on my YouTube channel, and I ran a flipped AP Biology classroom for 5 years, and a flipped AP Environmental Science classroom. All the videos for both of those classes are also up on that channel, so there's like 200 videos there. If you teach AP Bio or AP Environmental, you might want to check it out. And I did, while I was in the classroom, keep a class website. It is still live. I'll tell you, it hasn't been updated since I left the classroom in 2016, but it does have 5 years worth of posts on it, so you might want to check it out. It's thelab@cma.com. So that's me. And I mentioned I am a doctoral student, which means that part of my lovely life as a doctoral student is getting to study things. The thing I am working a lot on is computational thinking, which a lot of you are probably saying, what's that? Honestly, the academic community is kind of saying the same thing at the moment. So it would be awesome if some of you could help me in the study I am working on. I am working on learning what teachers who have not really been exposed to computational thinking think it is, know about it, understand about it. So if you are willing to provide me some data, it won't take you but 2 minutes. If you could pull out a device, go to this address right here, and there's a survey, there's 3 questions. I just want you to answer the first 2. And I don't need paragraphs and paragraphs. I'm just looking for some short information. If you don't want to do this, you can totally opt out and not. But for those who are choosing to, I'm going to give you a couple minutes, and then we will jump into our presentation today. I'm seeing most typing slowing down, so I'll give you about a minute to wrap up your responses. So, as we jump in today, I'm going to give you a quick disclaimer. When I was in the classroom, except for like my first year teaching AP biology, I did not lecture. I don't like lecturing. I don't know. Actually, I feel pretty confident that it's not the best way to teach. But sometimes there's some information that I can only figure out how to get across via lecture. So I'm going to be talking today a lot more than I would normally like to be. But I do hope to do a couple things. I'm going to give you time to stop and process what I've told you, think about how this is going to fit into your classroom. I'm going to give you some time to talk to those people who are sitting next to you, maybe exchange some ideas. And I hope at any point in time, if something hits your brain and you think, hey, I want to know more about that, you throw your hands up. It's a pretty small room. I hope that we can make it more of a discussion than me just monologuing at you the whole time. But there is going to be a lot of information. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat. We're going to start out with this right here, computational thinking. I'm just curious, very quickly, if one or two of you will be brave and either throw up a hand or shout out, when you hear computational thinking, what comes to mind? What are first things you think, associations you make, words?
Numbers.
Okay, I heard numbers.
Patterns.
Patterns, okay.
Visualization.
Visualization, I heard data somewhere.
Mental math.
Mental math, anybody else?
Modeling.
Wait, I heard problem?
Modeling.
Modeling. Anybody else?
Processing.
Processing, okay, excellent. A lot of you touched on what the academic would consider computational thinking to be, so let's talk about it a little bit. It has its roots in computer science, and it really, the term first came out 1980s-ish. A guy named Seymour Papert wrote a book called Mindstorms, and this blows my mind. 1980, Seymour Papert was already thinking, how can kids use computer programming to learn math? 1980, like, I can't even think, like, home computers weren't a thing in 1980. And Seymour Papert was already thinking about how can people program things to learn content. So it has its roots in computer science. There are lots of definitions. It really showed up as a thing that people were thinking and talking about around 2006. And since 2006, everybody and their brother has tossed out, here's what I think computational thinking is, here are the skills that I think is part of it. I'm going to jump into that fray today. We're going to talk about what I think it is, but it has a lot of definitions. At its core, though, it's identified as a broad set of practices for solving problems. And specifically, I mentioned the computer science part because it was discussed initially in terms of computer scientists tackling really complex problems. Using writing computer code, but also not using computer code. Just saying, hey, there's this big complex thing about it. I'm going to try to figure out how to come up with a solution to it. So broadly speaking, computational thinking is a set of practices for solving problems. How many of you know that acronym up there, EDP? What is it? Engineering design process. You are the second group that I've ever given this presentation to. In the first group, they looked at it and they're like, huh, that looks like engineering design process, to which I said, absolutely. Computer science is an engineering discipline. Computer science is in engineering. So as we go through this, you will see a lot that will look like engineering design process to you. The way I think about it is computational thinking makes the engineering design process more specific. So where engineering design process would say, identify the problem, computational thinking is going to say, all right, here's 3 or 4 skills kids need in order to identify the problem. Where engineering design would say, come up with a solution, computational thinking is going to say, here's a couple of skills kids need to come up with a solution. It is part of the NGSS. Now, I know, much to my heart's sadness, North Carolina is not a next generation science standard state. Keeping fingers crossed, maybe one of these days. But next generation science standards have embedded in them 8 science practices. And kids are supposed to learn these 8 science practices and curriculum and content at the same time. Computational thinking is one of those 8 science practices. And I want to put this out here. Coding is not computational thinking. I am a big fan of code initiatives. You've got your Hour of Code, you've got CSK12, you've got all of these initiatives that are trying to get kids writing computer code, usually using Scratch or some sort of like block-based programming language, which I think is fantastic. My wife's a software engineer. I want to see as many kids as possible getting into the software engineering pipeline. There are jobs there for, anybody know the median salary of a software developer with a 4-year degree? Somebody want to take a shot? I heard an 80. Any other guesses? 70. $102,000.
Okay.
Somebody gets a degree in CS, 4 years, they can start somewhere in that 80 to 100K range. So if I think about high-paying jobs, like I want to get kids into that pipeline. However, there is more to computational thinking than just writing code. Kids can learn some of these skills through writing code, but I'm going to contend that there are bigger skills that they can't learn through just doing some scratch programming. All right, so here's my toss into the fray of a brief blurb on what I think CT is. Y'all have got access to this presentation through the Sketch, so don't worry about writing it down, but I'm going to say it's using the thought processes, tools, and skills of computer scientists to solve complex problems, which really is a lot of what I've talked about thus far. So why do I think it's important? Several things. I'm going to put them all up here and then we're going to talk to them. So the world is complex. We have got a deluge of information coming at us all the time. We know the world is getting messier on a minute-by-minute basis. A lot of the things that you are going to see as being part of computational thinking will help kids sort through the complexity that is in the world. It'll help them process some of this information that's coming at them, and going to scientific literacy, make informed decisions about really complex issues like genetic engineering or stem cell therapy or climate change or any of these complex and controversial issues. CT skills will help kids to sort through. You have probably frequently heard it said that the jobs we're preparing students for don't exist yet. We need to give them skills that will allow them to be flexible, that will allow them to be creative, that will allow them to tackle complex problems. I was a biology teacher. This might be heretical. Kids don't need to know the steps of mitosis. Like, they can Google that. They need to know how to think and act like a scientist if they are going to be successful in the future. And like I mentioned a minute ago, CT does come out of CS computer science, and I do have an interest in getting as many students at least exposed to the field as possible, because if you talk to anybody who's currently in industry, they will say that most jobs now and almost all jobs in the future, no matter what they are, will have some component of computer science attached to them. So I want to get kids thinking about this now. All right, so we're going to have our first, you'll see the stop and chat come up a couple times. It's just me taking a breath, giving you a second. You're going to have to find somebody to talk to today. Introverts, I'm sorry, I am one of you, I feel your pain. But I also find value when somebody makes me stop and talk to somebody else. So I just want you to do two things. Find a partner in about a minute and a half, talk about what you heard about why CT is important, and then come up with one question. Just as it stands right now, what is sitting on your brain that you're curious about? I'm going to give you about 3 minutes. Talk, make a new friend. Or talk to somebody you're comfortable with already. Take about a minute to wrap up your conversation. Wow, all right, that was a quick wind down. I don't need a question from every group, but do any groups have a burning question you'd like to ask now while we have a minute? Nobody? Yes, sir.
So she asked, how do you do it with the motivation? Particularly ninth graders, trying to get them motivated to do CT.
So here's how I'm going to argue this. I think the best way to do CT is in the context of authentic problems. And I never had a student who was more motivated by let's solve this big problem versus let's memorize this stuff. So that would be kind of my approach. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So I guess when I see this, and I think this can be very complicated for them, but one thing is when I have to do graphing, and I'm a one-to-one school, so I have laptops, and so we graphed in Google Sheets, and that was such a selling point because it was, look, it takes you 2 seconds to get the data in and everything, but they had to decide how to best display, and so that there was some, thinking involved. But that's the thing, I would really like to incorporate this in a class because they do have a lot of tests, but sometimes I think it's going to be so complicated. I guess so, how is there a way to incorporate, my question I guess is there a way to incorporate it, but it's not.
That is the whole rest of my presentation, is how to get it into your class. No, you're good. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, sir.
I'd like to be able to explain to students, and I'm actually a media specialist,
Okay.
but I do a lot of collaboration with my science teacher because I'm also a graduate student here. How do I take knowledge that I'm gaining in the classroom and apply it not just to this little moment in time and this little problem that I'm on, but how does it correlate across the other curriculum?
As a media,
other aspects of the science that we're going to be
as
talking
a media specialist?
as
Just
a
in
teacher.
general. Okay, so this presentation I have tailored for math and science because that's where we are. But the way I think about computational thinking, the way I hope to present it to all of you, the way some other people are thinking about it, is this is applicable in every content, every discipline across the board. So hopefully you can find ways, or you can maybe bring this presentation to your ELA teachers or your social studies teachers and say, hey, I think we could do some really cool stuff with this. And if anybody wants to have further conversations on how people are doing this in English or social studies or arts, I'd love to talk to you more. It's just, science is my background. We're at a Math Science Summit, so that's where we're going to tackle it. One more question if anybody has. Yes?
How would you implement CT if you don't have technology?
You know what my next slide is? Code-free CT. Which is, okay, so I kind of take a different approach to computational thinking than a lot of the academic community. Like I've mentioned, a lot of people think coding is CT. I will contend, one, that the skills are broader than writing code, but also focusing on teaching kids computational thinking through Scratch programming or something like that's got a couple problems, and I see 3 of them. If you're teaching kids just to arrange some Scratch blocks, I think they are missing broader problem-solving foundations. So things like thinking about systems, gathering data, employing data, evaluating solutions. So I think if you focus on just coding and not these broader skills, the kids are going to miss some of the foundations that I think are fundamental to CT. Access. Not all schools have access to technology to have their kids write code. So I just put a paper out for review. I'm doing some writing right now around ways to get this into classrooms that have zero technology. If you have got tech, fantastic. I was in a one-to-one school. My classroom was continually, as Linda in the back can attest, pushing the boundaries of what you're allowed to do with technology. But I'm taking an explicit step back and saying focusing on technology as a way to teach CT leaves a lot of kids behind. And I want to find ways to get this out to all students. Also, integration. Most of you, I am going to bet, do not have a background in writing computer code. You don't have a background in computer science. And when you hear that, you probably, at least I, would feel a sense of intimidation. Like, I don't know how to do this. This is complex. This is complicated. And I think by stepping back from like the code-centric nature of it, we can alleviate that. Say, here's some concrete practices. I think you can probably put this in your classroom. And who knows, after we get through the presentation today, you can come and talk to me and say, hey, you're way off base, tweak it. Or, hey, maybe this will work. Also, we're going to talk, and the rest of the presentation is going to be based on my code-free CT framework. And here it is. This looks intimidating. The rest of my presentation is going to be walking through it step by step and giving you time and space to talk and think about how this can go into your instruction. Basically what I did in putting this together is, like I said, so many people have tossed out, here's what I think computational thinking is, here's the skills I think I should be in it. So I took 4 of the most prominent kind of frameworks, I saw what was common between them, and then I thought about which of these skills do I feel pretty confident can be taught without using any technology at all. And then as I put them together, and as I talked with a few teachers about this, they said, hey, this looks like engineering design process. So I kind of organized things that way. And I basically came up with 3 categories: understanding systems, solving problems, and then refining solutions, which many of you will recognize, like that's engineering design process. Like I said, computer science is engineering. And then within each one of these, there are 4 concrete skills, 3 and 2. And like I said, I'm going to go through each of these. We're going to talk about them. I'm going to give you an example of if I were doing this in my classroom, this is how I would do it. But this is the bulk of the remainder of the presentation. Don't be intimidated by it at this point. So we are going to go through, the way I'm going to organize this is for each of the practices, I'm going to first give you a quick definition. Once I've given you a definition of all of them, I'm going to give you an example, and then I'm going to give you time to think about it in the context of your classroom for a little while. I'll tell you that the example I'm going to talk through comes out of my brain as an environmental science teacher. So I'm going to be presenting this in the context of like a PBL unit on ecosystems. But my hope is that you can take these ideas and apply them to your context. So first skill within understanding systems is investigating a complex system as a whole. Here's what I mean by that. So when I say a system, I think of any complex thing that has got parts interacting with each other. Those parts could be human, they could be electronic, they could be machines. You could be thinking at like a person level, an ecosystem level, a government level. Wherever you have parts interacting and something going in one end and coming out another end, you got a system. So thinking about that system as a whole means a couple things. It's saying, all right, I recognize the system. Here's the thing that goes into the system. Here's what comes out of the system. We're not worried about how anything gets changed or altered inside. We're just saying, here's what goes in, here's what comes out. A very quick example, photosynthesis. Sunlight and water come in, sugar and oxygen go out. Okay, so input, output. When we're thinking about this system as a whole, we don't care what happens inside. We're just thinking big level, here's what goes in, here's what comes out. Then we're going to go a little bit deeper. And we're going to take this big system and break it up into levels. And the dividing into levels is going to be whatever makes sense to you as a teacher or to your students. So it's taking that system, putting it in a set of levels, probably hierarchical. So like, here's top level, middle level, bottom level. And basically you're taking the components in that system and saying, all right, these operated about the same level, these operated about the same level, and this goes up here. And you're starting to think about attributing system characteristics to a specific level. So I just mentioned photosynthesis. If I were to think about, all right, sunlight coming in, that hits a chloroplast. So my input is hitting that level of a chloroplast and everything that's going on inside of that chloroplast. And then my output in terms of oxygen, that is coming from the breakdown of water. So I'm going to put that on the level of, all right, here's everything that's happening that's breaking down water. So something's coming in at one level, it's going out at another level. Then we're going to go down even further, and we're going to start trying to understand the mechanics of this thing. So you're going to think about, let's see, if I were thinking about a chloroplast, what inside of a chloroplast, what are the little pieces, parts that sunlight is acting on, and how do those pieces, parts interacting with each other result in water getting broken up to release oxygen? So in my hat as an AP bio teacher, I would think, all right, Photosynthesis, you got this whole like electron transport chain thing going on. There are parts and molecules interacting with each other. So at this level, you are getting down to really like granular, if I were thinking about a watch, like the individual gears turning against each other to make the ultimate result on time. And you're also interested in how components and interactions change the input to the output. So how does sunlight coming in, making this chain of reactions happen in a chloroplast, result in water and sugar? How does this thing get to that point? And then thinking about students, the last one is being able to describe the system. And I think as far as like macro skills for the future, being able to describe complex things to lay people is critical. So in thinking about understanding systems, a student needs to be able to take whatever their complex system is and explain it to somebody who has no background or no understanding of it. I think in describing these systems, some really helpful tools could be like flowcharts or concept maps, maybe PowerPoint presentations, definitely visual representations where a student can point and say, here's where things go in, it hits thing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's what comes out. Okay, trying to make it very user-friendly, I guess. I am trying to explain the complex system of CT to you right now. That's what we're working on. All right, example, and then I'm going to give you some time to think about it. So, like I said, I'm going to put this all in the context of environmental science, thinking about an ecosystem and how humans impact ecosystems. Okay, that's kind of my brain on this. So, first thing I would have students do is choose an ecosystem. I don't care what ecosystem. It could be the tundra, could be the Amazon, could be a coral reef, could be whatever interests them. Like I'm a big advocate of student voice and choice, so I let them choose the ecosystem they want to work on. And that's going to align with the North Carolina curriculum because they've got to know their ecosystem. So choose an ecosystem. Then you are going to investigate the ecosystem in terms of inputs and outputs. Now, this is where you can let your students go as narrow or as broad as you like. If I were thinking about the Amazon ecosystem, I would be thinking, all right, sunlight comes in, rain comes in, nutrients are made, outputs, I get clean water, I get lumber, I get paper, I get medicine, I get soil retention, air filtration, water filtration. Like, here are the things that come in that make this ecosystem healthy and work, and then here's what the ecosystem gives us on the back end. We're not going to care about the inner workings, just here's what goes in, here's some things that come out. And then we are finally going to identify a human activity that threatens the function of the ecosystem. So student could pick anything. Like if I were thinking about coral reefs and maybe the Gulf of Mexico, I would think, okay, farming in the Midwest puts pollutants in the Mississippi, which make their way into the Gulf of Mexico and lead to a lack of oxygen in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, so you've got human activity, industrial farming, and it threatens the function of the ecosystem by reducing oxygen. So input, fertilizers and farming, output, low oxygen, fish kills. And then you're going to ask the students to understand how the input of human activity results in an unfavorable change to the output. So going to my Amazon ecosystem, humans logging the Amazon results in the unfavorable output of now I am filtering less air. I have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Once they have kind of come to that understanding, they can start thinking in levels by dividing the ecosystem into a series of levels. And this could be approached a bunch of different ways. If I am thinking about the Amazon, some of my levels could be like the basic inputs level. Here are all the things that are going into my ecosystem. And you could, if you've got super advanced students, you could say, you figure out what's going into this ecosystem. If your students need a little more support, you could say, here are some things that go into this ecosystem. Then another level I would think about is you got your trophic pyramid in there, and you could think about the individual levels of the trophic pyramid, and you could think about your nutrient cycling, so it could be carbon cycling, water cycle, nitrogen cycle. Any of these things that could be thought of as like a level would be worth considering. And you want to be able to, yes, question?
I'm just, when you're saying levels, are you thinking like levels in terms of steps, like processes?
So you can think of it a couple ways. Steps or processes would be one way you can
or
think of it.
just grouping them, sorting them
So,
by characteristics?
I think of it as really any way that you can organize it in logical levels, I think would be sensible. As I think about it, in terms of like, if I were thinking about, again, the Mississippi River and fertilizer, input, fertilizer, and everything else, sunlight, nitrogen, that is flowing into that ecosystem. Levels of the trophic pyramid, I could say, all right, on the bottom level, all this fertilizer causes an algae bloom. They eat up all the oxygen, that kills the fish. There's a couple levels right there. So any way you can kind of chop and dice it. And the important thing is that students connect inputs and outputs to specific levels. So you've taken your ecosystem, you've chopped it up into levels, and you say, all right, my input of sunlight goes in here. My input of water goes in here. Oxygen is made here. Wood is produced here. Water is filtered there. So it's all about hooking things together. And sticking with our humans, identifying the level at which human activity acts. So as my human comes in and chops down all the trees, if you wanted to think about that in terms of food webs, you have just cut out the vegetation that your primary consumers are eating, which is going to impact that level and then all the trophic levels above it. Next thing we're going to do is work on understanding relationships, which basically is going to be saying, all right, what is the chain of components that are harmed by this input? So if humans come in, again, chop trees down, that impacts my producer level, my trees, primary consumers, secondary consumers, tertiary consumers. Once those predators are gone, how does that impact humans or nutrient cycling or whatever? So we're saying this thing comes in, it touches component A, B, C, D, and here is the results at the end. And then finally, we are going to ask our students to describe that. So if you wanted this to be the stopping point of your units, it very well could be. Your students in, I don't know, I'd probably put them in pairs or threes, most likely if I had mine working on this, would give a class presentation on human impact on their chosen ecosystem. So the group would be responsible for saying, hey, we researched the Amazon, here is the human impact we see. So they would describe, here's my system of the Amazon, humans impact this, it hits component A, B, C, D, here's the output that we are concerned about. Okay, and that they would be responsible for explaining that to the class. And again, I think a flow chart or a concept map would be a great way to present this information to a class. All right, we're gonna breathe a second. I know that was a lot. I want you to take a couple minutes. So the way I work, again, I'm an introvert. Usually when I have a bunch of information thrown at me, I need to sit and process it myself for a minute or two, get some thoughts down. So I want you to take just a couple minutes, make some notes to yourself on paper, computer, text, whatever, about how you see this, maybe working with your curriculum or where, like some initial thoughts on where you think you could be seeing this in your classroom. And then maybe we'll talk about it in a couple moments. So I'll give you a few minutes to process. And actually, if it would be useful, I'll back up to there to where you can see the individual. About a minute and wrap up whatever thought you're working on. go ahead and find your buddy that you just chatted with and take not more than 2 minutes and just, you can talk about whatever you want. You could say, hey, this thing, here's what I like, here's what I don't, but probably what might be more beneficial is to say, hey, here's what I'm thinking about how this might fit in my classroom. What are you thinking? Teachers are the best thieves or collaborators, whichever way you want to look at it. So take a few minutes and talk to each other.
I don't know, I was trying to think of
I do, yeah, so it makes sense.
Okay, go ahead and take a minute to wrap up. All right, I hate to cut good conversation short. My hope is that you have made, or I would say that my hope is that if you have made a new friend for thinking through this with, that you'll exchange some information when you leave today. You'll keep the conversation going. I do, as I was walking around, I had a couple of thoughts that I want to mention. First of all, if tackling all this at once seems like a lot, don't do it. Pick like one skill and say, hey, this 9 weeks, me and my kids are going to focus on investigating complex systems as a whole. And maybe the next 9 weeks we're going to work on thinking in levels. And the next 9 weeks we're going to think, or we're going to work on understanding relationships. It could be a year-long project. I personally am the type that I just jump in with 2 feet and kind of figure it out as I go. So I would take this and throw it all in and say, all right, well, this worked, this didn't work, let's revise it for next time. But not everybody works that way. Yeah.
Can you split CT with CT framework?
So
People do they
when this did not exist when I was still in the classroom, I did explicitly teach engineering design process.
Okay.
And if I were doing this with students, what I would probably do is I would make these terms explicit so that they're starting to attach some language to things that they're learning. Keep saying, hey, we're working on investigating complex systems as a whole. Fine. Like I think it's really important that students start getting this language in their head so that they have something to reach for as they go out into the rest of the world. Any other quick questions? Yeah.
We were just talking, it seems more applicable to certain fields of science than others.
Possibly.
Like, there's a few teachers who are like, so you're saying, I don't like what AR
I honestly, I think that's a great point. I think that this is broadly applicable. Honestly, in a lot of ways, I think the curriculum and the standards might be the thing constraining the way we think about this. Like, if you're a physics teacher, you do a lot of problem solving. If you're a bio teacher, you're getting kids ready for an EOC where they just have to say boom, 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 boom. I would argue that all science students should be going in this way. So I would be figuring out, all right, within the context of my biology curriculum, how can I get them learning, you know, the boxes they got to check through doing these skills. So if I'm teaching my kids to investigate complex systems, they can learn a lot about what they need to know for like an ecosystem in the process of doing their investigation.
On the list, funny you mentioned the levels thing, 'cause I am a bio teacher. And when I started, this was my second year, when I started this year, first thing, so much of the curriculum is on molecular cellular level. I gave them a sheet that starts, and this may be sort of obvious, but starts the atomic and molecular. And I put sort of a size, we're taking 10 to the negative 10 meters. So I had that, and that's in the front of the notebook. Because one of the things, in particular when you get to genetics, they don't have a conception of where they are, even sort of size, or, so what I'm trying to do is kind of make explicit, even in that, even like a water molecule versus a complex protein model. I gave them visually what that is, but then always bring it back to the level of what does it mean that water molecule is polar. So you find some video with the electrostatic pushing the water, you know. So I'm trying to actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because it's totally applicable to biology, is get them situated in this level of, we'll say up to the organism level. But, so there are different levels, but it always, you can visualize it at the level of naked eye or experience everyday world. So that's, to me, that's, and I'm already focusing on that, I'm gonna focus on that. And how it affects, every level affects it, because that was lost last year, my first year, I didn't make that clear.
I love that, and if I were thinking like, as a biology teacher, that could be a theme for like 9 weeks. You could start at molecular, do levels of organization within the human body, and then, hey, humans are part of ecosystems, and we impact ecosystems at this level, and ecosystems are part of this broader globe, and they all interact with each other. So really, you could follow like levels of scale from molecular or atomic, subatomic, all the way up to global, and talk about relationships. Yeah.
So I think too, with the standards, it's all about a storyline. And so CT creates that and helps these kids kind of give themselves a storyline, because like you just said, is the idea that it's all very like abstract to them. But if you make these things flow and it makes sense from day to day, unit to unit, right? This idea of, okay, now we're on a cellular system because that cellular system is operating this larger system. And so it's that, it's giving them that storyline, whereas physics diagrams give you that storyline. Biology diagrams do too. You just have to know that arrows may not go one way, but they go 3 different ways, right? But again, I think that the understanding systems piece is how is your storyline written. And I think that's where we've got to kind of play with our curriculum a little bit, because the way that it is written right now is not a storyline. You've got to take and kind of turn it into a story.
Well, and I love the coherence of that, rather than saying, all right, we're doing photosynthesis now. We are doing food webs now. We are doing genetics now. Like, rather than discrete units, how does all this weave together? All right, we're going to go ahead and jump into, so, understanding systems. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to hop into solving problems. There are 3 skills I identified in here, and this is the one that you are going to see, at least in language, seems to draw most on that field of computer science. We're going to talk about that a little bit. So the first skill in here that seems to be, it is one of the most consistent against all computational thinking literature. Everybody says abstraction is key. So what is an abstraction? Basically, it's highlighting the components of a system that are necessary for understanding while obscuring those that aren't relevant to the concern at hand. So what does that mean? If I am thinking about my humans logging the Amazon rainforest, I don't care about all the side things. Yes, maybe they're logging it for agriculture, but maybe the students don't need that part. Maybe they just need they are logging. So we're going to take that agriculture and economics piece and maybe put that off to the side. It's focusing in on just what we need to see to understand this situation, this system, this problem, etc. Great example of abstraction. There's a painting out on the wall out there, and I walked out of the bathroom and I looked at it, and it's like a box and 3 circles and a couple lines, and I was like, oh, that looks like somebody reaching for something. I'm kind of an art nerd. I walked up to the painting, title was Fetch. Somebody catch it. So I'm like, all right, good abstraction. You gave me the things I needed to understand this is somebody reaching for something. So that would be an abstraction. The next one is developing an algorithm. How many of you get a little nervous when you hear the term algorithm? Good, we got some honest, and maybe the rest are lying a little bit. So all an algorithm is a series of steps to solve a problem. You use an algorithm every day when you get dressed, when you're getting kids out the door, when you are planning a lesson plan, essentially. So I was kind of militant about following my lesson plan. That was an algorithm. Boom, boom, boom. Now I know there are many of you that are much more free-form in your lesson planning, and you just kind of go as the spirit leads you. That wasn't me. For me, when I was running a class, my lesson plan was an algorithm that solved the problem of my students learning whatever they needed to learn. And it can use branches and loops to account for human influences. So in that lesson plan, I say, all right, here's my plan, but if Billy acts up, we're going to go this way and take this second course. Or as I'm going down my lesson plan, if students don't get this, we're going to loop back and do this part again and try it again. So it's got branches and loops to say, hey, we're operating in the real world. The real world's kind of messy. Here's how my algorithm accounts for the messiness of the real world. And then the last one is troubleshooting and debugging, which, know it or not, is something you do every day. All it is systematically identifying problems in your algorithm. So the lesson plan, I can either, well, there will be sometimes you will know immediately this is not working, and here's the problem that's not working. Or you may reflect on it and say, hey, this part didn't work. Or at the end of the semester, you get back your test scores and you're like, crap, they missed something huge. Where did they miss that? So troubleshooting debugging is figuring out where does my solution not work and then tweaking it. There's a lot of ways to go about troubleshooting and debugging. It could be a very systematic process where you say, all right, I'm going to take my algorithm, I'm going to tweak one little thing, we're going to try it again, see if we get a better result. It may be guess and check. My students use guess and check a lot. There wasn't much systematicity to it. They'd be like, all right, let's try this, let's try this, let's try this. Why am I not getting the result? I'm like, you're kind of like just taking a shotgun approach. Let's think about doing this in a systematic way. And then fixing those identified deficiencies. So going back to our example of humans messing up an ecosystem, here's how I would do it with environmental science students. First thing is creating the abstraction, and this is going to be critical to ultimately producing a solution to the problem they have identified in their ecosystem. So obviously we know if we are thinking at the scale of a whole ecosystem, there are going to be myriad problems and influences and inputs and mitigating circumstances. What you're going to want your students to do is isolate the chain of components leading from human action to consequence. One concrete human action to one concrete consequence. And that chain is their abstraction. It's saying all of this other noise that's going on that causes problems in the ecosystem, we're not going to worry about that. We're just worried about this one chain of events that takes me from point A to point B. So within this chain, they're going to identify the target for impact reduction efforts. So it's possible that in developing a solution to human influence on the ecosystem, they want to start right at the human level and do something to stop humans from doing whatever they're doing. Or they might look at their abstraction and say, somewhere in the middle where component A is interacting with component B, maybe that's a more sensible place to try to fix this problem. So they're identifying within this chain of events, where should I try to make a difference? And then they're going to come up with an algorithm. Now, for some reasons I'll explain in a minute, if I were doing this with students, I would have them develop 2 different algorithms. And an algorithm is just a set of steps to address the problem. It goes, do this first, this second, this third. It doesn't account for human agency. So like somebody would be able to pick it up and say, I am going to go to point A, and then I'm going to do action B, and then I'm going to do action C. You're just following step by step. A really common way to illustrate an algorithm is to have somebody write the instructions for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and then see if somebody can follow those and get a peanut butter jelly sandwich out of the other end. But like I said, for reasons I'm going to talk about in a second, if I were doing this with students, I would want them to come up with 2 different algorithms to solve the same problem. And we'll talk about why that is in a second. In creating their algorithm, they should try to include some of these more computer science concept loops, like an if-then. So you're going through your steps, and when you get to step 3, if this thing is true, then I do this. If this other thing is true, then I do that. Or a loop, where it says, okay, you need to do this part of the algorithm 3 times before you move on. Or a conditional, which would say, hey, if this is kind of what's happening, it's like an if-then, which basically says, if the oxygen is this, I'm going to do that. And then we're going to wrap up with troubleshooting and debugging. This is where, if I were doing it with students, I would go for peer review. I would have students in pairs of 3s working on this whole project. At the end of this stage, I would partner them up with another team, and here's how I would have them go through it. I would have each team kind of explain, here's my ecosystem, here's the problem I'm trying to solve, and here are my 2 algorithms. And maybe they're written out on paper, they give them to the other team, and they don't explain them. And the no explanation piece is critical, because if an algorithm is good and effective, somebody should be able to take it and follow it and get the result that they're supposed to get. So there wouldn't be any explanation. It would just say, hey, here's my system, here's the problem, here are my 2 solutions to fixing this problem. And they should be in very stepwise 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the peer reviewers would read through the algorithm, maybe act it out, maybe map it on paper, maybe find a way for themselves to understand it, and give some feedback that can be used to make revisions. Say, hey, I think you missed a step here. Or maybe your loop would be better if you did it 5 times. Or did you consider this? And then you could go through another round of revision if you like. I'm going to stop there. Take a couple minutes, write some notes to yourself about how you're thinking about this now, where it might fit your curriculum, and then we'll discuss. But for my introverts, take a second and think, and for those of you who are starting to fade a little bit, we've only got 1 more stage, then we're done. Yes?
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
First? So, I've been teaching probably too long, but it sounds to me that, and I still love it, but
Go for it.
It sounds to me that what this is about is semantics, like renaming a lot of the stuff we do
It is.
in a way that makes it more for coding, or that if, like it's I don't know that it's that we don't have them do this problem solving or do this examining things, but this is what you're doing is asking me to use different words to explain. Is that correct, or am I totally
No.
missing
I
the
think
point?
that you are hitting on something very important, especially like when science teachers hear CT, computational thinking, they get scared. It's about problem solving. Science is about solving problems. A lot of this you are probably already doing in your
So
classroom.
the goal is for us to get those other words in there.
So yeah, there's a couple goals. One would be trying to make it more systematic, to make sure that you're doing it as part of, like, I envision CT as not a tack-on that we do every now and then, but it pervades the way you teach. Like, this is the way you present content to your students, which is a lofty goal. It's a very lofty goal. So I think about it like that, and I do think the language is important.
But I think it has to be a tack-on because they need the content
Absolutely.
in order to get to be able to solve that problem.
So I would
So
argue.
it's almost like content, and then here's the problem.
And see, the way I would attack that is the content would come through approaching the problem. Or at least when I was doing, like, my classroom when I ran it was, I was in a public school, I was, I had to do the state mandated test. But my classrooms were project-based learning, wall to wall. So my kids learned the content through doing things like this, which is, it's difficult, it's time-consuming, it's a hard way to teach, but it's kind of a fun way to teach. And it does. I know the ask I'm putting out there is a hard ask. Like, I think in a lot of ways it involves maybe reframing some of the things you're already doing. But I think it's doable. Like I said, I wouldn't tackle this all at once. But if your kids are already doing these things, maybe attach some language to it, and they're good to go. Any other questions before you guys jot on this for a minute?
With each of these sections that we're discussing,
Yes.
the understanding systems
Sure.
and the problem solving, are they each kind of separate
You could,
or a topic?
when I think about this, I always hated when curriculum was dictated to me. I would always like, even if I had a curriculum that was given to me, I'd end up tearing it apart and doing my own thing with it. So I would say approach this in whatever way makes sense to you in your context. For me, if I were doing it, I would do, this would probably be a 9-week-long project, and we would go start to finish in the order I presented it. But for some classrooms, it might make sense to say, hey, we're just gonna work on the refining solutions piece, or we're just gonna work on one skill within that. So it's really about like, you as the teacher knowing what is best for your students.
Because I can see different topics, different areas applying better to
Absolutely.
a different section of each of these three.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And I will tell you full disclosure, like when I was teaching in the public schools, accountable to end-of-course tests, honestly, I didn't think about the end-of-course test. I just taught what I wanted to teach. If my kids did well, they did well. If they didn't, they didn't. More often than not, they did well. So when I think about putting things like this, I take it from how I taught, which is like, I'm gonna do what I think is best for my students, and there's a state test at the end of those. Now, I know that for a lot of you, like your principals and your administration won't let you get away with that. So it can be a tricky dance when you're trying to do stuff like this. I'm gonna give you a minute for whatever thoughts you were jotting, and then I wanna have you quickly talk to each other, and then we'll start kind of moving towards the end of our talk. So, my experience was that a well-constructed field unit still got the response that they needed. That's not the experience. So we did everything in the environment. And we did so if every unit was not full, there was a project that we were flashing around. So I will say that any projects that I wrote while I was still in the classroom may or may not align with this, because I've been kind of working on this since I've been back in grad school. But as I've revisited my old projects a lot. All right, take 30 seconds and quickly wrap up.
Right, I think
All right. So just as a general temperature gauge, as we work our way through this, are you feeling more or less nervous? Just give me a thumbs up, thumbs down. Less nervous? Wait, what do we do? Look. Higher. Sure, less nervous. Thumbs up. Who would say more nervous? Somewhere in between. I'll take right there. That's fine. I'll take that. I can work with middle. Okay. Let's talk about this last one, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up. So, the only way a solution to a problem is good is if you actually refine it to where it best fits that problem or best solves that problem. So I think of two skills underneath refining solutions, and I am not going to kid you. This first one up here, gathering, analyzing, and employing data, really is like 7 or 8 skills. Like there's a ton of skills around data. But in refining a solution, you're going to need all of those skills. So when I think about gathering, analyzing, and employing data, there's a couple things I want to highlight. At least with my students when I was teaching, whether it be a lab or a project or whatever, my students had a really hard time figuring out what is important, like what actually counts as data. What are the things I need to be measuring? What are the units I need to be using? How do I organize it? So I think the first thing that needs to be done is to help your students identify what actually counts as data. What is going to give me the answer to my problem or let me know my solution is working? And then they're going to collect and organize that relevant data. And then I think the most important part is that they actually process that data and figure out what it's telling them. As a science teacher, I often had colleagues who would say, math, science, they don't quite they don't go together. Or my students would tell me, this isn't math class. And I would tell them, numbers tell you everything about science. Like, that is the data from your work. These numbers are telling you important things. So one of the skills that I think is most important in this is helping students figure out how do we analyze this data and visualize it to figure out what is it telling me? What story is my data communicating to me? And then how do I actually bring that to bear on my solution? So I've got this data, I've analyzed it, I've visualized it, great, but what is that telling me about my system or the solution that I am proposing? So how do I tie all of that together? And then evaluating solutions for effectiveness and efficiency. Here's why I wanted the students to develop 2 algorithms. Like I said, my wife is a computer scientist. They have problems they solve all the time, but usually there are multiple ways to get to the same solution. Some of the ways of getting there are very fast, but they may be prone to breaking, or they might be buggy. There are other solutions that are absolutely 100% bomb-proof, but they're slower. So I think it's really important for students to start understanding, hey, there are multiple solutions to a problem. Depending on what your constraints are, which solution is best. So for your scenario, is it best to have fast and maybe a little bit unstable or a little less long-lasting? Or is it better to have slower but permanent? So helping them to realize one solution isn't best because it's our one solution is best because it fits the constraints we're dealing with. Now, in terms of my example, I realize that we are dealing with problems that are global in nature, so it's going to be hard for your students to actually gather data on their solution. A couple of proposals I would make. So, on the gathering, analyzing, and employing data, what I would do is I would have my students look at their algorithms, look at their problem, and figure out, okay, what sort of data would let me know if this is an effective solution. So it could be like reduction in logging output, or it could be increase in agricultural land, or it could be, I don't know, the amounts of water quality measurements. For your students to decide, all right, what data do I need to understand if my algorithm is doing what it needs to? And then I would start making asks. I would do my best to find some expert panel. Could be professors here at State, could be government officials, could be, I don't know, industry professionals, could be a higher science class. So if you're doing this with a bio class, your experts could be your AP bio students. But find some experts to come in. Look at the student's system, their problem, and their algorithm, and then propose. Here's what I think would come out of this. Your experts aren't doing any analysis. They're just saying, here's what I see coming in. Based on my knowledge, here's what I think the consequences would be of algorithm 1. Here's what I think the consequences would be of algorithm 2. It's kind of a weird workaround to get data. Another way you could do this maybe is there are lots of simulation softwares online. Might be a place to bring in one of those and have your students actually set up a simulation to spit out some data. With that data in hand, your students would be responsible for evaluating their competing algorithms in terms of the constraints of the challenge and based on the data they've gotten, and then selecting the best solution. So if, let's say you've been able to get a panel of experts, they come in, they look at a kid's algorithm and say, all right, solution 1 may stop logging, but it's also going to result in civil unrest in your country. Option 2 might keep the people happy and productive and reduce logging, but not completely get rid of it. And then your students can look at their algorithms and say, all right, we think this one is best because. And at the end, I would have my students present all this out again. If I were doing this whole thing, it could be, I would probably do it as a set of 3 presentations, like check-in points along the way, this being a culminating kind of project. Often, when I set up projects like this for my students, I would set it up in terms of like, hey, there's a board of investors who are interested in your idea or interested in your solution. Come in, you're going to pitch your system, the problem, and the solution. At the end, your board of investors could be a panel of more advanced students or industry professionals or whatever, are going to vote on the best solution. Best solution gets investment money in the form of extra credit. I would use that. And then, like I said, they're going to do a presentation at the end. So for the final time, pause for a moment. Jot yourself some notes. We're going to talk, we're going to wrap up, and I might have you out a few minutes early. We'll see. All right. So before y'all wrap up your discussions, I'm going to give you one other quick thing to talk about. Actually, you've probably been doing this all along. So rather than talking to each other, just kind of What are you thinking about this at the moment? Anybody who wants to jump in? We've got sessions out at 11:15. We got about 20 minutes. I've just got like 2 or 3 more minutes of talking to do. So off the top of your head, what are you seeing that seems like a problem? Where are you seeing this maybe fitting in your curriculum? What do you like about it? Just anything for the good of the group. Yes.
So my question would be to you is these steps, I think, or at least I use them a lot, but I don't call them those names.
Then you're there.
We need a glossary.
Yeah.
Okay, algorithms means
Yes.
kind of like blooms, like evaluating,
Uh-huh.
you know, like all of
Language.
those like synonyms for
Sure.
each of those steps. If you or NC State or somebody could come up with a glossary for us so that we're not all
So-
reinventing that wheel.
I will, 2 things around that.
Yes.
This thing that I've just talked through with you
Yes.
is going to be coming out in an academic journal like in the fall, but I know teachers don't take time to read academic journals, nor should you. Like, probably not a good use of your time. However, I am probably going to be writing up something for NSTA science teacher on this, but also at the end of this presentation, I've got a link to a folder where I've been collecting my resources and presentations and things on this that you'll be able to go to. You'll be able to access this. It's got further writing on it that's got a glossary for like, here's what each one of these things means.
Okay.
So you'll have access to that folder.
Okay. But you get what I'm
I
saying.
absolutely.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yes.
It seems a lot, I mean, like, wasn't it, because I've been looking at GSS stuff
Right.
before, and between the skills, process skills, and the cross-cutting concepts,
Yep.
it kind of seems it all just fits in there, so it's an order for them almost.
I think of this as kind of your bridge between content and practice. Like here's, at least as I think about it, here's how I would get my students from content to application or like actual scientific practice. So I think of it very much as a bridge. Any other thoughts? Competition?
I'm excited about using some of these ideas to sort of create overarching themes to middle school science because you can teach so many different, in some ways, not entirely closely related topics that it's hard for the kids to sometimes see a flow to what we're doing. And I've tried, all kinds of different theme ideas, but I like this this framework as a way to say we're going to be talking about systems this year, and so in each case we're going to be looking at the same kinds of ideas, inputs and outputs and levels of organization, and so everything that we tackle is going to be under that umbrella. I think it might make sense for the kids to think about things.
I really like that. I know when I was, do I have any other AP biology teachers in here? Okay. So for the reason I like what Paul just mentioned is AP Biology 2013, they redid their curriculum to where it aligned with NGSS and they organized everything under 4 big ideas. And once I realigned my curriculum under like the big idea of evolution or the big idea of systems, it gave my students like a rack to hang everything on. Like they could say, all right, I can think of an organism evolving, or I can think of like molecules evolving, or I can think of ecosystems evolving. Right? Exactly, virus is a great example. So I think using maybe this as, like Paul mentioned, as a big theme, might give your students something to hang, like each of the disparate topics on. And it also provides cross-links. Any other thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah.
And creating a glossary, it would be helpful to have that in Spanish and with access for other students.
That would be awesome, yes.
Yeah.
I will.
So can you help?
I might be able to find somebody who can.
That'd be great. That'd be super helpful.
Yeah, yes.
So, something that had kind of been discussed with another group that I'm actually working with in CT is using symbols.
Yes.
So that then, okay, if we're focusing on the pattern here,
Right.
there is a and there are symbols already assigned to these words, right? Like it's
Yep.
what infographic you pick.
Yep.
But this common symbol within your glossary so that throughout the year your kids know, hey, I see the check, or I see the little steps, right? I'm looking for patterns. I'm focusing on a pattern within this concept.
Yes.
And then I'm moving from that pattern to something else.
Yeah.
So,
I think visual cues like that's a great idea.
and that would help with your language too, because then they know, hey, okay, I know what this means.
Yep.
This has been explained to me, so.
It's a great idea. Any other thoughts?
It's almost like you're.
Sorry, we'll go here and then.
In my units, and when I teach my units, I teach them all that
absolutely. And I do like, one of the other things I recognize is this is a new thing for most of you. Some of you have probably seen this in bits and pieces, but this is a new thing. And new things take a while. And honestly, like, I got out of the classroom so that eventually I could be teaching teachers full time. That's kind of my end goal as a professor. But I need to figure out, like, what is the best way to get this material to teachers in a format that is useful. I frequently am frustrated by the academic community because for them, publication is like the end goal. But a publication cycle is like a year long, and most teachers who are actually doing this stuff, you're not going to read a 30-page article and the review of educational research. It's not something I would have done. So I'm going to be working on ways to get this out more quickly, possibly to the consternation of my advisor, who would love me to have like the perfect academic resume. But I think getting this stuff out quick is important. So one thing you might be able to do is, my contact information was on the front. If you have questions, please email me. If there's something you saw here that you want to know more about, I will Skype with you. I will talk about this. I will provide you, I've had one article that came out in the Science Teacher last spring. That's in that folder of resources if you want to see another way that I'm thinking about this. Other comments?
Do you have a blog?
I should have a blog. I had a blog while I was in the classroom. I am actually currently, so my computer scientist wife is currently on maternity leave. I think one of her projects is going to be helping me get a new blog up. Right. So let's finish up with this. We covered questions. So in that vein of how can I help teachers with this, that original survey you did, there were 3 questions. I hope you didn't answer the 3rd question yet, because the 3rd question was just pie in the sky, what sort of professional development would you want to make this a part of your regular instruction, like the way you do business? And by pie in the sky, I mean, like, I want to come to NC State paid for 2 weeks in the summer, and then I want ongoing coaching throughout the year. Or put it all out there. So whatever you would like, put that in that survey, and I will be looking at all that later on.
And how would we get access to this so that we can do it slowly? Okay.
Right. So, and that second link down there, a second web address, is a link to a Google Drive folder where I am currently dumping everything I'm doing on computational thinking that I think would be relevant to teachers. So there's some stuff in there. This presentation, I think I put it in there. If not, I will be putting it in there later today. And as I present and work on things over the coming years, I will be dropping new things in there. So check it out periodically. And if there's something in there that doesn't make any sense at all, please send me an email or give me a call.